Hello, welcome to my channel again, Jane Kenny's Creation, where we talk everything Australia, living in Australia, migration to Australia, life in Australia, including everything about migration and immigration plan to any country of your choice. Stay tuned. My name is Jane and I live in Australia. Today we're talking about a very important topic. I'm sure you know there have been many people comparing whether they should migrate to Australia or UK. And there have been so many questions about this very topic. So today I have decided to dig in, compare and contrast between these two countries. There are similarities because when you talk about Australia, Australia has a big history with UK. There is a lot of some similarities there as well. So today we're going to find out, as a migrant living in UK and Australia, what are the things to expect, okay? What is the life you're expected to live? How are you going to live there? How are your expenses like? And how is your life going to be? So you remember when you are planning to migrate, there are so many things you look at. And today we're going to point at all those things so that it will help you to make your immigration plan a successful one. Before we go on, I want to say thank you for my returning subscribers. You guys are great, very awesome people. And please, if you have not subscribed to my channel, could you please subscribe and press your notification button so that when I load my banger video, you will be the first to watch, okay? Let's dig in. UK, Australia. UK, Australia. I live in Australia. I'm an Australian. But in this very video, it's going to be based on facts. No sentiments. I promise there will be no sentiments. Things I give you here today, if you go online and search, you might as well see the same facts, okay? Promise. All right. UK, Australia. The first thing we're going to talk about is distance. For people migrating from Africa. It's not a new thing to say that Australia is very far from Africa, but very close to some other countries like China, Philippines, and Indonesia, and so on. But to Africa, South Africa, East Africa, West Africa, very far. Talk about Nigeria, talk about Kenya, talk about South Africa, Zimbabwe, Cameroon, Zambia, and so on. Australia is very far. Coming from African countries to UK, it will take you roughly 6 hours, 22 minutes if you are flying a direct flight. But do we still see direct flight again? Do we still fly direct flight from Africa to UK? That is a question you have to ask yourself. I will tell you my experience. Last traveled 3 months ago when I stopped over in Doha. I saw so many people flying to UK. We all landed in Doha. We were all waiting. Some of them waited for almost 8 hours before they can connect to their next flight. I don't know what is happening, but there's something is happening. So it's hardly to see direct flights from Africa now to UK. But it might be a temporal something. But the flight distance for direct flight is roughly between 6 to 7 hours. Now, if you're traveling from Africa to Australia, it's going to take you, if you're going to Sydney, Eastern States of Australia, it will take you around 19 hours. Boom! Yes. If you're coming to Western Australia, where I live, it will take you around 16 hours plus. Okay? Distance from Africa to Australia is very far. This is also similar to time difference between Africa and UK and between Africa and Australia. Time difference between Africa to UK is about 1 hour time difference or no difference at all. Whereas time difference between Africa to Australia will be about 10 hours for eastern states like Sydney and Melbourne and about 7 hours for Western Australia. Okay, talk about the distance from Africa to UK and Australia. If you're someone that will migrating and want to be traveling maybe 2 to 3 times a year, then UK will be your best bet. But if you're someone that's just traveling to chill, maybe once in a year you travel, Australia will be your best destination. The same thing when you want to make a call or contact somebody in Africa and you are living in Australia, you need to check out your time very well, because you are mostly between 7 to 10 hours ahead of someone in Africa. So you know when to make your call and when to contact these people. And the same thing goes to someone from Africa that wants to make a contact to someone in Australia. You need to consider time different. Whereas for UK, you don't really need to think. It's just 1 hour difference. So when we talk about distance applicable to flight tickets, so flight tickets from Australia or to Australia from Africa is higher compared to that of UK. All right, so let's talk about the second point, which is the weather. UK weather, Australia weather, which one do you go for? All right, Australia and UK have reverse weather seasons. When it's winter in Australia, it is summer in UK. Okay, so it's opposite. They are in direct opposite weather seasons. So I will give you an idea. So in UK, December to February is their winter. But in Australia, December to February is their summer. But in UK, March to May is their springs. But in Australia, the same month, March to May is their autumn. In UK, June to August is summer. In Australia, the same month, June to August, is winter. In UK, September to November is autumn. They are transitioning to winter. But in Australia, September to November, which is the same month, is our springs. We are transitioning to summer. So how cold is UK winter compared to Australia winter? UK winter is very cold, ice cold, chill cold compared to Australia. Yeah, UK is mostly snow. In UK, in winter, you see snow everywhere. Whereas in Australia, you don't see that much snow. But there are some locations where it snows, but it's not very common. To compare the two weathers, let me give you average temperature of UK in winter and summer compared to Australia winter and summer. The coldest winter period in UK is January, and the average temperature is 7.3. In Australia, the coldest winter period is July. It is 17.9. So these are the two coldest period. UK 7.3 degrees, whereas Australia is 17.9 degrees. Cold, but not too cold in Australia, whereas in UK is too cold, ice cold. And let's compare summer period in Australia is January is 30 degree during the daytime. But it fluctuates early morning and night. So at night it comes to 18. That is the hottest period. Night is chilling, 18, and daytime is around 30. January only. Then in UK, the warmest period is 18.9. So even in spring period in UK, it's still cold. It's still cold. If you're someone that doesn't like cold weather, that finds it hard to live in cold weather, that is allergic to cold weather, then Australia will be your best bet. Australia is a beautiful weather. And it's not only me, you can go online and compare the two weathers and you will see what is there for you. And that's why Australia is a destination for so many Caucasians. They just love Australia. Yeah, Australia has one of the best weather seasons in the world. You can Google it. Okay. I said to you, I'm not going to be partial in everything I'm saying. So that's why I said you can verify the facts. All right. Verify. So we've talked about the distance. We talk about the time difference, and we talk about the weather. So this will be the fourth point. So the fourth point we're going to talk about today is cost of living and earning power. If the cost of living is high and I'm earning high, is okay. But when the cost of living is high and I'm earning low compared to the cost of living, then it means I'm going to suffer. All my money will go to bills and expenses. Cost of living in UK and Australia, they have a relative comparison in the sense they have just few differences. But I'm going to point out some area where they differ. I've written these things down so that I don't bring my opinion, I don't bring in sentiments to this. Remember, it's all based on fact. So I say they are relatively closer to each other, cost of living, but not earning power. Or I wrote some things out. So in this comparison, we are comparing two big cities in Australia and UK. So we're talking about London and Sydney. All the amounts I'm going to mention here in this comparison section is going to be in US dollars. It's not going to be in pounds and it's not going to be in Australian dollars. So it's in US dollar. I want to use a central currency to compare both. So cost of living for one person in UK will be around 1,800 USD dollars. Then cost of living for one person in Australia will be about 1,900. So per person, Australia is more expensive. For family, there is a big margin. For a family, it is cheaper in Australia, whereas for a single person is higher. We talk about rent. Renting for a single bedroom in UK will cost you around 1,900 per a month. So the comparison is per a month. Whereas in Australia, it will cost you around 1,700 per a family. So we talk about food. Food is kind of costlier in Australia in the sense that per a person will spend around 490 or 95 in Australia, where in UK you spend around $426. But when we talk about rent, renting a 3-bedroom apartment in Australia is cheaper compared to renting a 3-bedroom apartment in the UK. So single bedroom is cheaper in UK, whereas a family rental is cheaper in Australia. Okay, now, as we're talking about the rent and the houses, let's talk about the size of houses. You cannot, for any reason, compare the size of apartments in UK to Australia. Australia is bigger. So UK apartment houses, room size is very small, unless you talk about a modern house. But those houses that are already in existence in UK is very small size compared to Australia. Australia houses are large. They are big, even in cities. Then when you go off cities, they will see like big compounds, big houses. So it's not that the cost is more, it's just like it's a culture. You hardly see those tiny. So for example, a normal 3-bedroom apartment in Australia will have 2 lounges, it will have studies, and it will have play room and so on. But in UK, you just have room and tiny lounge and so on. And we also have dining areas, more of the kind of home we build in Nigeria. So that's what you see in Australia, the apartment size. Let's talk about buying houses. How many times have you seen someone living in Australia celebrating house purchase online, or they buy a house and they come online on social media and tell you, ooh, buying houses in Australia is common. It's not cheap, but it's common. It is the culture. So it's not a new thing that someone bought a house. Every migrant in Australia, 90% of migrants in Australia buy houses. You can say that for UK. Let's talk about the minimum wage. Earning power is higher in Australia compared to UK. In my comparison, average monthly salary for a person in UK is about 2,896 American dollars, whereas in Australia is 4,211 American dollars. So you see a massive difference, almost 40% difference. So Australia is very high. When you check about the minimum wage, people that pay high in minimum wage, Australia comes in top hierarchy. Let's talk about the minimum wage of Australia compared to UK. We're going to compare it in pounds. The minimum wage for someone in Australia, in Australian dollars, is $21.38. That is the minimum you can pay someone in Australia. Or put it in pounds, is about 11.9 pounds. Minimum wage in Australia is about 11.9 pounds as in 2022, as in now. Whereas in UK is 9.90 pounds. You see the massive difference. 11.9 compared to 9.9. So Australia is higher. That's why the average salary per a person in Australia is about 4,200, whereas in UK is about 2,800. Example, food is slightly higher. The cost of food is slightly higher in Australia compared to UK. It's about few dollars difference, but earning power in Australia is higher. Now, let's talk about job opportunities for migrants, especially African migrants. Australia and UK have similar rates of unemployment, about 3 point something as of today, unemployment rate in both UK and Australia. But the thing is this, let's talk about people we know. Let's talk about news we hear. Let's talk about migration, okay? People that migrate from Africa to UK, most of them, they get job, but these jobs are very competitive. And most time, they end up not getting job that will pay them enough to talk about buying houses in future when they finally settle. But in Australia, there's job everywhere. People do 2 to 3 jobs. So finding a job for an African migrant is not a problem. And the earning power is high. That's why the target every migrant in Australia is just to buy a house once you get your permanent residence. Let's talk about immigration plans since we're talking about migrants living in UK and Australia. Immigration plan for UK compared to Australia. Australia is very straightforward when you talk about earning permanent residency. When you come with temporal visa to UK and to Australia, when you are in UK, it's harder. The pathway to permanent residence is that not very straightforward compared to Australia. Australia is very straightforward. These are the facts that people don't know about Australia. So once they mention Australia, they say, oh, it's so hard to get to Australia. But they don't know that the immigration process is very straightforward. And once you are in, your pathway to permanent residence is very straightforward. I will compare. If you study in UK, after studies, UK government will give you postgraduate work visa. And before you go for your permanent resident, you must work for 5 years with your postgraduate visa. So let's assume that you studied for 4 years. Then you need to get a job after your graduation and work for 5 years before you qualify to go for your permanent resident. But in Australia, if I come with a student visa, let's assume that I come to do 4 years program, okay? So once I finish my 4 years program, I will get my postgraduate work visa, which lasts for 2 to 4 years, is renewable. But because I've studied for 4 years, so the permanent resident policy is that you must have stayed in Australia for at least 4 years before you apply for permanent residence. So if I have studied for 4 years, it means that I have stayed in Australia for 4 years. So now the policy will tell me that if I go to regional Australia to work after my graduation, all I need is to work for 6 months. Then I'll be qualified to apply for my permanent resident. Or if I work in the city, then I have to work for 1 year to apply for my permanent resident. You see that? So in the sense that I've studied for 4 years, I have only 1 year to go for my permanent resident. So before I continue, I will tell you that everybody that is engaging on economic migration, the target, 99% target is to finally settle in this country, have your permanent resident, and probably have your citizenship. So that's the target. So, but Australians is clear cut. I've studied for 4 years. I work for 1 year. I go for my permanent resident. I go for my master's for 2 years, master's. Then I will get my postgraduate visa and I'll work for 2 years, making it 4 years. Then I'll go for my permanent resident. Whereas if I study in UK, do my master's for 2 years, I'll come out and get my postgraduate work visa and I have to work for 5 years. You see that, making it 5 plus 2, 7 years before I'm qualified. Whereas someone in Australia is already finished master's 2 years, work for 2 years, go for permanent residence. So within that 4 years cap. That is a secret today. Go and verify. Let's talk about life expectancy. I'm sure you will say this is not necessary, but it is. Okay, so it's about us living and life. So life expectancy in UK is 80%, whereas in Australia is 83%. There's some difference there. Then quality of life in UK is about 84%, whereas quality of life in Australia is 92%. That's high. Next thing we want to talk about is human freedom index. Talk about human freedom index. How freely do you live in these countries? So human freedom index for UK is 8.7, whereas in Australia is 8.8. So it's mostly the same. But do you know what is a freedom index? Freedom index is just saying how safe is this place? How freely can I live in this country? Okay. How does this country place value on human and dignity? So Australia is higher, whereas UK is lesser, but they're almost the same thing. Another thing I want to say is that Australia is a gateway to many countries. And once you get your papers, you're a permanent resident in Australia or citizenship, you can go to any country freely and work. Having Australian citizenship or passport or permanent resident will open doors to you to any other countries you want to relocate to. Yes, there is this saying, there is racism in Australia. Ooh, I will tell you things. One day I would make a video about racism in Australia compared to another country in Africa. I will mention that country, but it will be a topic of discussion in this channel. Now, let's compare racism for blacks in UK compared to Australia. In Australia, you know the history of Aboriginal and white Australians. So this thing has made it clear to everyone that you cannot openly be a racist in Australia. Like in UK, talk about soccer players, for example, in UK. You know the amount of racism they face every day, even though they are champions. They are talented soccer players, but it's hard to accept them. Those horrible racist comments they face every day, they make about them. That's why before they start every soccer now in UK, they kneel down to show equality. They show that this sport does not tolerate racism. But it's still happening. The acceptance is not there yet. That hierarchy thing is still there. But in Australia, you can't openly see that. I can't even imagine a black player or Aboriginal player facing open racism during soccer or comments. Or the media and the people will swallow you. It will be a topic of discussion for months in the media. I'm talking about the modern day Australia, the current Australia. So these things, when I see online, Australia is the most racist, I'm like, okay, why? Bring it on. Like, seriously, are you talking about now or are you talking about then? Things has changed. I'm talking about now because this is the present I live. I'm talking about the present. And when we talk about migration, we're talking about present. Talk about our children, kids here. How do they mingle with each other? They interact very well, both black, white. They mingle with each other. They are friends. They attend functions together. They attend birthdays together. There's nothing like black, white segregation when it comes to families here in Australia. I'm not saying that racism in Australia is totally wiped out. No. What I'm saying is that it is not in the open like it is in UK. And you know, there are still old generation people. But because the new generation doesn't really care about all these things, so it kind of subdues the older generation version of black and white system. Whereas in UK, it's still high. It is still high. Check the history. I'm talking about check the current happenings. So now you have known all these facts about these two countries. It is time for you to make an informed decision towards your relocation plan. And remember to subscribe to my channel and put on notification button. Thank you, and I will see you again in the next video. Ciao. Bye.